Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Kala Anand. I'm the director of Connect Consultants. Connect is based out of Singapore. We are a strategic education advisory firm. I owe much of today's afternoon session and the content that will flow to my background with the Australian government, for whom I worked the longest, looking at the education strategy for South Asia region. And for the past 4 years, working across institutions within Australia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, more around partnerships, but importantly with international schools, because as I was visiting a number of schools through the years, kind of realized that there was that missing part of the puzzle, Australia and New Zealand, in the heads of a number of schools. And I said it was time to set that right. We started with a lot of initiatives, the Connect Counsellor visits to Australia, bringing in a lot of university visits into schools to ensure there was this regular information flow. So starting from there as early as 2012, and to actually get here is, oh God, I have no idea what's happening here. To be part of IC3, in terms of the content, only shows how the interest for the region has grown, but there continues to be the stuff we don't know. So thanks again and this is probably evidence of what we are looking to address today. So this morning was very interesting at the launch, when I heard about, and I think what stood out in terms of that information was the whole thing around biases and how some of the biases lead us to not make very rational decisions. And the only way you can probably counter some of the biases is through information, right? So how information kind of gets you through that rational decision-making process, and you minimize some of the risks through that information. So I was kind of looking at this whole thing, in the mind map of the puzzle, and I said, let's kind of plug that information bias in. For one, it's quite a daunting task for a student to make a decision, but even more as educators and counselors, when we ourselves may not have the right information to guide the student through that process. So what we will attempt to do here is probably fill that part of the puzzle. So today's afternoon session will not highlight too much about this is what is the whole education system of Australia, what's happening in New Zealand, because all of that is going to be available, and we will have the people here with whom you can connect later. But I think we're going to address a very important question. It's about not just looking at a student, guiding a student to a study choice, talking through a little bit more about the region, the institution. So for you to take back what's happening that's interesting, and then take some questions from there on. I often do this for students, but I always like to throw this. These are stuff we all have heard about: the Wi-Fi, Google Maps, ultrasound, the jetpack, disposable syringe, instant coffee, electric fence, there's a flight recorder, black box. So what's common about these things? It's a less known fact they all come from Australia and New Zealand as inventions. Most often when you actually talk to students and and I'm kind of going to lead this somewhere, it's about, we didn't know that. So let's start with stuff, most often they'll say, when do you know? We know only when we accept what we don't know. So it's a bit like, let's kind of take that couple of steps back and realize we're going to talk about a destination that's done a lot of work, and there's a culture of innovation and research and education that's pretty world standard. Just some key highlights here across the two regions. About Australia, I think combined, I have the next slide in New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand combined have the population of Mumbai. So in that sense. So we are really talking about between 24 million people, the kind of innovations and what's really happened from that region. But some highlights of Australia: yes, it's a country of 20 million people, but what's been, I think, great highlights is the stable economy with a consistent positive growth. So there's been over 3 decades of continuing growth. And that's important because a country that goes on a positive scale is going to promise a lot more beyond studies. It's a great case study, if you do get a chance to look at what happened during the global financial crisis and how a country like Australia handled it. It really didn't get affected mainly because of the stringent financial structure that the country had, and that's why finance continues to dominate as one of the world-class systems as far as Australia is concerned. Multicultural. 1 in every 4 Australians is born abroad, and many of these panelists you can hear as well, if they've come from Australia, they probably are, the parents have been outside, or they've kind of been raised in another country. So obviously people from all over the world came across there, so it's a very multicultural environment. most Australian cities, and if you've been tracking the QS World Rankings, you would find Sydney to Melbourne, Canberra's actually made it as well. All these cities are up there in the most livable cities. What does that mean? That means that it's a high quality lifestyle, infrastructure, and it's the most urbanized country as well. That also means that a lot of population is in and around those cities. But that said, the regions are as well developed. So if you're really talking about Queensland as a region, we're not just talking about the state of Queensland and Brisbane, the capital, but what's really happening across regions like whether it's Townsville or Cairns, and how each of those sub-regions have developed their infrastructure, which has kind of moved the quality of lifestyle wherever you live almost consistent. Innovation and global recognition, we kind of touched upon with those multiple inventions across both regions. Of course, New Zealand also clubbed in there. But the Asia focus, and that's something I want to highlight very specifically when you're talking to students, is if you miss the Asia story, you've really missed the boat. We know that Asia is the next frontier of growth. This is really where we're talking about regions like Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, which is where the world is actually, the axis moving. And hence, Australia and also New Zealand, located in that rim, where they connect both to the Pacific rim as well as the Indonesian rim, make them very strong in the Asia context. So the relationships that they have had for years with Japan or Singapore or Hong Kong is extremely strong. That when you're looking at internships, when you're looking at, I'm from Singapore, right? So when we have an alumni event for universities, Australian or New Zealand institutions, you'd find like pretty much every top CEO has had their education in either of those countries, and most of Australia because there's lots more universities there. And that sets you thinking of how well embedded these two countries are in Asia, and hence that also translates to the curriculums. When looking at doing business, it's not about just business in its isolated, but doing business in Asia, which is extremely important for the student of the future to be. How do you look at a country like Vietnam, which is growing, and every multinational, large multinational in Vietnam is headed by an Indian CEO, the head of Coke or the head of Pepsi. And why is that happening? Because here you have an excellent English-speaking Indian talent who knows how to thrive in the chaos of Asia. And that's the talent that I think the future will look at. And hence, it's very important that irrespective of whichever university they look at, that they kind of keep that Asia link very strong. Australia has about 43 government-recognized universities. New Zealand, population of 3.8, as I said, combined, there will be about 24 million. What's kind of striking, I think, different as well for New Zealand is the Global Peace Index puts them as the second most peaceful country. Of course, we'd have loved for you to win the World Cup. It broke a lot of hearts. Yeah, you lost the World Cup, but you won a lot of fans. So let me put it that way. Extremely politically stable country. Of course, your leader is quite an icon. So somebody I closely follow. Multicultural society, and I quite like if you've got fans in the room of the Maori way of life and principles, it's very embedded in the way New Zealand presents itself, which probably shows in the way their people communicate with each other. New Zealand comparatively has about 8 state-funded universities, and interestingly, all in the top 3% of the world. So the whole idea is how do you kind of have fewer institutions, and how do you develop them into world-class? This is not about, springing up a lot of universities and losing their international rankings or their performance. So here are some spotlights. This is across the board that we'd like to talk about. All universities are government accredited institutions, so you don't have to kind of worry, are they going to be okay, are they recognized? They all are. The specializations go beyond the generic. And what's interesting about those universities, as you kind of delve into that, we're not talking about business, we're talking about agribusiness, right? So agribusiness is probably one of the largest employers in the region, and you're talking about universities thinking about, those kind of specializations. You're not talking about business in isolation, you're talking about business with psychology, which is kind of going to become a little bit more embedded. We're not just talking IT, we're talking data. So it's going beyond those specializations. The depth of the curriculum is leading to subject-wise leadership. Most often everyone asks me, there's only that many universities in the top 100, why aren't there, But the point really is, do you want a highly ranked university, or do you want to go to a university for a specific reason? Interestingly, somebody asks about environment, or, so I kind of say, look at James Cook University, for instance, in Queensland. They're not in the top 100 in the world, but they're number 1 in environment. They're number 2 in the world for environment, biodiversity and conservation. They're number 1 in marine biology, and they're at the Great Barrier Reef. So if a young student wants to study environment, where would they rather study? To the number one ranked world university, or the university that's best known for that curriculum? So in terms of when looking at these universities, you'll see the depth of the curriculum often indicates how strong the university is. Another spotlight to put, and very relevant to today's afternoon discussion, is the affiliation to professional bodies and certifications. This puts both countries very distinct, and from the number of regions that I've traveled and looked at curriculums. For instance, a law degree, like say from an Australian national university, can get you to practice law in about 8 to 10 countries in the world, right? Or for that matter, a psychology accreditation from the Australian Psychological Society, which most of their programs will be affiliated to, allows you to practice in a Singapore or Malaysia because there's mutual society recognition. So this is very important for career progression. When a student starts to look at a professional degree, this is not about just studying in a country to just stay in that country, but where can I, when you're talking about portability of degrees, we're talking about these affiliations. So every program most often is recognized by the local industry association. What that means is the industry sets the standards of what's really taught. Right? A program like actuarial studies, for instance, if you finish at the university, you pretty much get exempted up to 14 odd subjects from the Actuary Society, which is, and even with just, we've been talking to a couple of insurance companies in India, and they say, give us a student who's just passed 4 exams, and they'll be on a faster track than any of our employees. And here you have a student who can actually finish from a university and get 12 of the 16 subject exemptions. So that's really, that's the kind of industry-integrated curriculum we're talking about, and that's very unique about this region. The career support services, and those are 2 angles we'll focus on, is, again, what the president of Huron touched this morning. This is about lives. This is not about commoditizing. This is about every student has a story. So, and hence, when every international student comes in, what's the plan? Is it about just delivering an education, but how do you kind of support them post that study? And hence, that leads to the during study and post-study work rights. Both regions have a fantastic opportunity where you can work while studying, as well as an opportunity to stay back in the country post-studies. I think Australia offers 2 years, New Zealand offers 3 years post-study work rights, and internships and the industry integration that each of those regions actually have. A culture of research, and that's important why I touched on those innovations, is because I know today Australia is offering a lot of scholarships. The government itself is offering a lot of scholarships in research, and New Zealand has gone a step further, that students who actually come to study or pursue a research degree in New Zealand would actually pay the same fee as a local New Zealand student and would not be paying international. And the government really supports it, and you can actually work full-time while you're still doing a research. So the idea, as you can see, is to attract talent towards creating this culture of research and innovation. Getting on, so where are the jobs? I'm going to give you the Australia snapshot, only because economy-wise it's a larger, and by and large the region itself would be very similar. So I kind of have some stats on this. Healthcare and support services, anything to do with the healthcare area, we're talking about whether that's medicine, because of the aging populations, physiotherapy, psychology, and every allied sports sciences, anything around the health is going to be extremely important. We're talking about, in Gold Coast, for instance, the entire health precinct is a massive investment by the government, about to create 17,000 jobs around just the health area. Retail is a great area of focus. They're kind of looking at across food retailing, and I think that's very similar into the New Zealand region as well. Professional scientific and technical services, veterinary, who'd have thought, computer systems design, but e-commerce is again a hub where, like Dropboxes just moved the hub into Australia. That's more the apps area, but a lot more e-commerce business jobs are moving there. Education and training. Australia and New Zealand, I remember Canterbury have always been at the front run of teacher education from New Zealand as well. With the private schools as well growing in the region, teachers and teaching talent is under a lot of demand. So everything around counseling, teaching, these are areas of very high demand as well. Students may not be considering an education as a career, but if they're really passionate about teaching, this is where one should be looking at as well. Accommodation and food services, tourism destination along with that brings a lot of jobs. So whether that's event management, whether that's hotels, all of that. So I'm kind of going to leave a bit like that. And these are the last couple of 2 slides that I'm going to get out. Now, coming to employability initiatives. Why is it then important for a destination that wants to make itself look attractive to an international student, or promises a future for an international student, and how is it taking upon itself to support this. For instance, the Australian government with its International Education Association has actually created an online tool to help cast career aspirations. So every international student gets access to how do you apply for jobs, how do you prepare for interviews, a complete guidance tool. A state like New South Wales actually has an employability training course that students can actually come to look at how do you look for jobs, how do you write a covering letter. So there's a whole guidance around that. Study Queensland, I think one of the topmost programs that I've come across, it's a $1.6 million program, which is about 21st century skilling for students. So this is, how do you kind of digitally enable face-to-face experiences for students, as well as a whole e-portfolio app on how do you record this, so that when you're actually presenting to an employer, you're presenting your whole story. So this is taking it to the next level, right? So this is about the government actually putting money where the mouth is and saying, you've come to the country to study, but it's not just important we give you an education, but we make you job ready, we make you employment ready. Obviously, no country can guarantee you jobs because that's very individual dependent, but what's important is that we give you beyond an education, we give you the right skills that would actually take you to that point. Initiatives in New Zealand. New Zealand, the government as a whole, has a Making Students Work Ready initiative, which is fantastic, which is conceived at the federal level, and then each state engages. Sorry, I think there was, the Wellington Regional Economic Development Agency has a Work Ready program, the Christchurch, New Zealand has a Work Ready program, and the Study Dunedin has a Work Ready program. Each of them basically working towards the same thing, and how do you get those students with the right skills and that ready. So with that introduction, I'm going to move to introduce our panel. I hope that's given you enough to kind of think about the region and what's really happening. We do have a fantastic panel here. Lisa, Director, International Office of Future Students at Bond University. Andrea from the University of Wellington, Arjuna, AJ, as we call him, from the Australian National University, and Barry, our own Barry from Oberoi International. I thought what's interesting is before we kind of get to each of the panelists, there's designations up there, and they're going to talk a bit. But I think it's also interesting to hear about, a few things that I kind of probe further. I like to hear a little bit more panel. So I'm going to get Elisa to, of course, introduce her university briefly. But it's fantastic. Lisa, you like Shawshank Redemption. That's my favorite movie, too, isn't it? Yeah, so anybody seen Shawshank Redemption? Fantastic film. So that's Lisa's favorite film. And the quote from the movie, we can get busy living or we can get busy dying, is something that stuck with her, which shows a bit about how passionate she is about this space. Lisa's extremely passionate about girls' education. And you like to learn about all things dinosaurs, which is interesting. So you can catch up a bit around that. So with that, Lisa, if we can get you to just introduce your university briefly for the audience.
Do I need the microphone? Can everyone hear me without it? Or would you prefer the microphone? Mic? Okay, here we go. Thank you very much, Carla. So my name is Lisa Cowan. I'm the Director of International for Bond University, based on the Gold Coast in Australia. We are Australia's first private, non-for-profit university. Oh, sorry. No worries. Australia's first private not-for-profit university. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary as an institution. Very small boutique university in Australia, so quite unique out of those 43 universities. We have 4,500 students, and 42% of our students are international students from 90 countries around the world. So very diverse in our student population, and we also have the lowest student-staff ratio at 10 to 1. So really looking at a personalized experience for all of our students.
Thank you. Next we have Barry next to Lisa. Barry is Deputy Head of Oberoi. Everybody knows him in his avatar at Ambani International. That's where I met Barry. I kind of dragged him. I know he's the Aussie here. So I said, Barry, you're the Aussie who's made the move, and we need you there as well. Barry loves sushi, but can't take cucumber. So kapamaki is off your table, completely off that table. And Barry's passionate about suicide prevention, which is great. And lovely to see a lot more apps that are actually getting developed in Australia and New Zealand region, which I'd like to kind of share with you about bullying in universities, education institutions, and what's kind of support system for suicide prevention. With that, Barry, and again, very rarely have I seen somebody love the color purple with your profile, so I love it. Go ahead.
I'm Barry Phipps. I've been in Mumbai for this is my 5th year. I've just finished 1 year at the Oberoi School. Before that, I was at the Ambani School, and before that, I was working in Africa, a couple of different countries there. I was brought up for a little bit of time in Australia. I'm not as Australian as probably what I sound. I was actually brought up in a small country above Australia called New Guinea, and on a little island in the Pacific called Bougainville, and that's sort of that's a way back when somewhere. And but I did my university studies mainly in Australia, so a few universities there. So I'm glad to be here.
Fantastic, thanks. We've got Andrea. Andrea is actually based in India and has the New Zealand flag flying here. Andrea's favorite destination is Portugal. You like Mediterranean food and the color blue, so that kind of paints a picture out there. And Andrea is extremely passionate about refugee rights. If we can have you.
Hi everyone, kia ora and haere mai, as we would say in New Zealand. I've actually been based in Mumbai for the past 12 years, but only, yes sir, and मैं हिंदी में भी बात कर सकती हूँ, तो बाद में थोड़ा बातचीत करना चाहिए मेरे साथ. And I've joined the university 1 year back as the country manager. I'm in charge of marketing and recruitment for the region. We are a comprehensive university. We're a world-ranked university, number 215 in the world this year. All of New Zealand's universities are in the top 3% worldwide, so extremely high-quality destinations for study. Anything else about my university? We have about 21,000 students in total, of which 3,700 are international. Indian students are potentially my 5th largest cohort at the moment, with maybe around 200.
That's pretty good diversity. We've got Arjuna there, AJ, and AJ is with the College of Business and Economics. If you're wondering what CBE means there, we're just so used to calling that CBE. So the College of Business and Economics obviously offer, the programs that most Indian students actually go ahead to study, and he's a career consultant within their services there. Some commonality with Andrea, because you're passionate about refugee rights as well, AJ, and you love chicken biryani. There's nothing that better. So just across is Lucky's, which is probably the best you can get in Bombay. And you're not going to find too many friends because you have a phobia for dogs. Yeah. So yeah, that's a Mudana. So a little about you.
Thanks, Carla. Yeah, like Carla said, Arjuna or AJ, whichever works. So for me, more than CB career consultant, I was an international student not long ago. So I moved from Sri Lanka to study at one of the universities in Canberra, and then life just took its turn and decided to stay in Canberra. So ANU, Australian National University, we have about 26,000 students currently studying with us. I work at the College of Business and Economics, where we have about 7,600 students, and there's also Audrey here from the College of Engineering as well. I'm going to say more than 50% of our students are international students. Don't know the exact percentage of the Indian students though. One thing I would say is, as an international student, one of the biggest things I found was that when you're an international student in a country, it doesn't matter where it is, the noise which comes with it needs to go away. So let it be accommodation, traveling, the infrastructure and things like that. Whereas in Canberra, we are a very small place. 390,000 population. I just Googled it just to make sure that I got the numbers right. We've just been introduced to light rail, so that kind of tells you how small our state is. And then anything is 20 minutes away. So I work in the city and I live on the south side, which a lot of Canberrans frown upon because it's on the other side of the bridge, but it takes me 15 minutes to get there.
Yeah, and if you're a self-confessed sport nut, so you should be able to be biking to university probably. Thank you so much. So a cheer for our panelists, people. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to get Barry to respond to this. And you're deputy head, but I want you to put that hat on, that counseling experience that you've got. In your opinion, when students are looking at a study destination, or they're looking at the study choices, and if they're looking at by destination, what do you think are factors they need to consider? If you're saying, because most often we'd like a counseling discussion to start what you want to study, but most often it's students are like, I want to go to this country. So when you're kind of working that process, when they're looking at the destination, what are some factors you'll ask students to consider if they were shortlisting by destination?
So if you're thinking about Australia, Australia is a very different university experience than it is if you're heading to what students think about as the stereotypical American style of educational experience. And so for me, it's about helping kids understand, first of all, what the next 3 to 4 years is going to be like, and then beyond. If they're thinking of getting out of, let's say, India, and they're thinking, well, I want to study somewhere else, it's because for whatever reason, they think that the local context doesn't have what they're looking for. So the big questions are about what is it they're looking for? Is it the experience they're looking for in the next 3 years or 4 years? Or is it the work opportunities or the job prospects that may not be available locally or experiences locally that going to a destination may be able to give them?
Fantastic. So that kind of puts it back to the prospects and the growth. So if I can just get Lisa to comment a bit around, if a student is actually looking to, a destination, looking at the future careers and prospects there. So if you were to talk for more Queensland or Gold Coast, what do you think are the regions of growth? Any kind of organizations that's headquartered in your part of the world?
Sure. Queensland has quite a diverse economy. As Carla mentioned before, the healthcare and innovation industry is booming and is set to continue to boom. We have a number of homegrown companies as well as international companies that set their base in Queensland, but it's definitely the largest, the healthcare sector is the largest employer, so Queensland Health employs more Queenslanders than any other healthcare company. Other areas of growth include the building and construction industry, mining, which has been hit and miss in Queensland, but is set to be on a growth pattern. We have Rio Tinto and other international organisations with bases in Queensland. And tourism and hospitality continues to grow. So we're very lucky. The southeast corner of Queensland and the Gold Coast, where I'm based, is a tourism destination. But that means that we have companies like Accor, Marriott, Flight Centre, a number of others that have their bases in Queensland. We also have a thriving film industry. It's not Bollywood quite yet, but on the Gold Coast, Village Roadshow produces a number of movies. Aquaman was just filmed on the Gold Coast, Pirates of the Caribbean. For a film and creative media student, it's a great place to be, or anybody who wants to be an extra and have their claim to fame, really. And then, as mentioned before, the retail sector continues to grow. So companies like Billabong and finance. So some of the programs that we're seeing a lot of growth in are around big data, finance, actuarial, because there's risk in every industry now, and actuaries are in demand in India as well as in Australia and many other countries. So it's really a diverse and booming economy in Queensland, and a great place for a student to be based for part-time work while they're studying or if they're looking to stay on after.
Fantastic. And with the Gold Coast having hosted the Commonwealth Games, sports as an industry is kind of taken off as well. I had a chance to catch up with Village Roadshow Studios, and they actually said for the next 5 years, their studios are booked. So which means every student who actually comes in to study film has work for the next 5 years to just work on a film after Thor and Aquaman, which is exciting. So if we can just move on to Andrea to talk a bit about your region then.
All right. So I'll speak both from a Wellington perspective as well as an overall New Zealand perspective. So in Wellington, we have a very thriving ICT industry. So a great deal of jobs in engineering, particularly the digital engineering technologies, software engineering, network engineering, business analysts. Apart from this, one thing that most people would not think of when they think of New Zealand, we have a very vibrant digital and creative media industry. So if you've all seen Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, these were all made in New Zealand, produced by Weta Studios as well as Park Road Post-Production. Apart from New Zealand homegrown productions, we also have a lot of Hollywood movies coming for their post-production these days. James Cameron has just decided to buy a house in Wellington because he spends so much time there now working on his movies. So, for example, some of my students in my music program were helping to work on the scores for the next Avatar movie. That's the type of industry exposure that they get as part of their internships. So VFX, animation, those who would like to work within musical scoring for films, it can be a fabulous destination for students looking for those areas. Other areas that New Zealand specialises in, we have a very large agriculture industry. So students who are interested in biotechnology, food science, etc. We also, one of our other main GDP earners would be tourism. so students looking to study hospitality or tourism. We are also known for our culture of innovation and technology. So whether it is biomedical engineering, whether it is students who are looking to go into ecology, conservation, environmental science, these are all growth areas within New Zealand, particularly renewable energy and sustainability as well.
Yeah, part of AJ to Canberra.
Yeah, so Canberra is it's a public service capital. So all the big departments which help run the country kind of works out of Canberra. In saying that, the government is currently going through a change process where digitalization and also creating efficiency in the way they work is creating more and more work in the consulting space. So if you're a big four, so I used to work for PwC and KPMG, EY, and Deloitte. So the big four companies are growing double-fold year on year because of the work demand. So if it's technology, let it be automation, artificial intelligence, project management, auditing. So even within auditing, so if you're studying accounting, not just auditing numbers, but how does IT audit come into play, which is really a big growth as well. And also Canberra, because it's a public service, the disposable income is really high for people who live there. So what that means is the retail industry and the fast food industry and the hospitality industry is also growing, where students will potentially have opportunities there. And then, we are urbanizing. So Canberra is growing in terms of building. So construction industry seems to have a growth as well.
Fabulous. Thanks for that. So that gives you an idea of what the regions represent. So coming back to Barry on that question a bit, and I'm going deeper into the careers, how do you see students talking about study choices? Are they talking about future careers, or do you see a change away from conventional choices, study choices? Are they thinking, yeah, this is going to rule the world, this is the jobs that I think, are they aware enough of that space? Do you see that?
I think, as we all know, we're in the Indian context, and there's a lot of kids who are still influenced by their parents and grandparents' ideas about economics or business or medicine, and so depending on where you are, and the freedom that parents are allowing to explore other possibilities, and I think that's one of the reasons why liberal arts is becoming more and more popular, is because it's allowing kids to open up their choices as to what they may want to study, and I think it's part of our responsibility as counsellors or as educators to be able to get the kids to look beyond the traditional three or the traditional mindset where it's only going to be this or this, because there are so many other opportunities available.
Absolutely, and that kind of also puts most of these universities allow for double majors, and which is again the flexibility that any of those universities offer. Is no student has to declare the major when they come in, but they do have the choice to understand what the options are, and at a point actually develop around that. And just sticking to that whole support system that the university offers. So if I can just get AJ to comment on this a little bit more, because you come from the career services of the College of Business and Economics, and we'll move on the table. Is how does your center then, as a university and your business for the faculty, what kind of initiatives do you take in terms of helping students understand the careers end of it, and how do you assist them in terms of finding that space in the employment spectrum?
Yeah, so it's a College of Business and Economics. I must say, though, we are the pilot, so we are the guinea pigs of how we could kind of set up these services for the faculty, and then College of Engineering and Engineering and Computer Science are following suit as of next Monday, so they're setting up their own team, and that's the new way of thinking ANU is going towards. In my role, so we have 7,600 students. We have 7 of us in our employability team, managed by Gina Diamond, who is our senior manager. 4 of us in the careers team, we look after students from a one-on-one point of view. So from the time you arrive at the university, you can, from your day one, you can book in one-on-one appointments with us, and we coach them through employability skills. So it's not just resumes and interviews, it's all about making them understand what their personal brand is, and then using media platforms to kind of really draw those personal brands. And the other thing is our employability team, we have a program called the Momentum Program, where it is a professional development program run over 6 months. Students get selected, like they go for a job interview, then they get partnered with a mentor from industry, locally or internationally, depending on what the students want, who will coach them through 6 to 12 months of work integrated learning, understanding the market internationally and locally as well. And then we have the work integrated learning program, which is for credit internship. Every semester we place up to about 80 students, 40 domestic and 40 international students in an organization within Canberra, non-for-profit, government and private, where students, instead of studying for 12 weeks, they work one subject, so 10 hours a week, and they get a credit as well. So what we're doing is opening doors for their students to kind of get a taste of the Australian work culture as well. And then we have Globe, which is a Globe internship program. We placed 110 students last year internationally, so China, India, Singapore, Malaysia, in which where during summer when students return back, they have an opportunity to connect back in their local country if they choose to return post their studies as well.
Fantastic. I hope the pilot would be a success for sure. We're already seeing some level of traction to that. So, Andrea, just with Wellington, and I know that you have a very formal, the region itself has a very formal internship workplace program, as well as how well it's connected with industry. So, if you want to just highlight what your university is doing in that space.
Yep. So very similar to ANU, my university has a career services department, and that is about preparing and empowering students for the New Zealand work environment. Now, they run workshops and they also do one-on-one sessions. So we do encourage students to go there from the first day. Don't leave it right until the end of your 3-year bachelor's degree or your 1-year master's, because at that stage they can start preparing for themselves for their future job. What we find is that many of our students come from different cultural backgrounds, and there can be very different expectations of what should be done during a job interview, or what should be included on a resume, or how you should behave with a potential employer. In New Zealand, we're a lot more casual. You might go for a job interview and your potential boss might want to small talk about the football game that was on last night or something, whereas here you'd be like, hello, sir, yes, great to meet you. We do also have work integrated learning. So, for example, all of the Bachelor of Engineering programs in New Zealand include 800 hours of work experience in the 2nd and 3rd year. It means that by the time our graduates finish, they are work ready. They are very attractive graduates to industry because they know that they have already worked in an engineering company and they know how things are done. My Bachelor of Arts has an internship within it. Our tourism manager major has an internship. This is all at the undergraduate level. Postgraduate, we often have either full-time or part-time internships, usually paid, as well as industry projects in many of our masters. And this would not be unique just to my university. It is a common feature across most of the New Zealand universities because we find that this lets the students have a foot in the door. They have something on their resume, they know what the work environment is. It means that when it's time to go out applying for jobs, they already have some connections.
And that's great because the taster is, and most often I've had when I talk to parents and say, let's not talk about jobs, they just need to study. But why is this important? I think these conversations are important because I just don't stand here as, as somebody in the business, but as a mother of a 22-year-old who's actually studying in Australia. And, when she had the chance to do internship, she's studying psychology and she interns with Autism Partnerships Australia. Is after her first job session, she said, this is what I want to do every day of my life. And that's great because that's the conviction you want students. So that kind of gets them attached. So there's a good chance that if they're actually interning in an engineering company and saying, what am I doing here? This is not what I want to do, which is kind of going to define the 4 years that I'm going to spend. And instead of thinking at the end of the 4 years, this is not what I wanted to, but it's giving a taster to the life that could be. And what you touched on, Andrea, is that the environment that you're going to step into, is this something that I'm going to be passionate about every day of my life. So coming back again to touch more briefly on Bond, because I know you've got a very strong industry integrated ecosystem within Bond. So if you could just want to come about a couple of your financial hub and a few other things with Reuters and some things that you want to touch about.
Sure. Well, similar to the others, we have a very strong career development program. But because being a newer university, Australia's first private university, it was a big risk, I think, 30 years ago, opening up a private university in Australia. And I think that shows the entrepreneurialism that our academics come with. Many of them are still working in their field, so they're full-time academics, but they may have 2 or 3 businesses on the side. They may be still a partner in a law firm. So industry is really embedded in our programs. Our academics are sitting on industry panels, industry are sitting on academic panels, and we really embed industry into our curriculum. For example, we just had Screen Queensland and our Faculty of Society and Design do a partnership which is creating a creative hub co-working space on campus, which means filmmakers and writers, producers will actually have space on campus. They'll be working from that space, and they'll be sharing green rooms and lunch rooms and everything alongside students. So they're really getting to know each other and becoming part of the bond team, and the students are becoming part of the industry. Our Career Development Centre has many of the same points that have been touched on. We have 20 staff dedicated to helping students find internships, part-time jobs, a lot of the transactional items that we've talked about with mock interviews and preparing resumes and things like that. But the really fantastic advantage for the students is that this is a lifelong service. So we know that, I think they say that we'll have 7 careers in our lifetime now. The jobs of the future, 40% of them don't exist at the moment, and you all are in a really challenging position in preparing students for a world that is quite uncertain. So being able to have alumni come back and utilize that service, to be able to go, I'm having a career change and I need some contacts. I want to be connected with alumni. I want somebody to give me some tips on what it's like to actually interview now, because I haven't interviewed in 7 years. That's a fantastic service that's available to all of our students.
Great. So we've got about 15 minutes, and I'm kind of conscious there might be some question and answers, but I want to kind of end the discussion again with Barry. So something that Connect has done quite regularly is we've done a lot of councillor delegations across from this region. There's a few councillors here in the room who've been part of our trips, and there's always been, after a trip, they would come back and say, I didn't know this, I never realized this, and for one they're thinking, oh, it's really not that far. That's the first thing I get. Otherwise, there's always this, Australia's too far. So your hat in terms of having visited a university there, which I know you've gone and spent some time, what stood out for you in terms of the university system or the region for you in Australia in terms of the education system itself? When you say these are the 2-3 things that I was, I didn't know I was impressed by, or the country does different, is that something that strikes you on the top of your head?
There are 2 things. Number one, students need to be a little bit more independent going to an Australian university than they are to go to universities in the States quite often. Universities in the States, let's say, are often more like a nice private boarding school. In Australia, it's not so much like that. It's you are, I don't want to say you're left alone, but you go to college, and you can have a job off campus, and it's not the same boarding school idea. So it doesn't fit all kids. It definitely fits the independent kid. The other thing is that Australia, even though it gets some bad rap sometimes, it's not a place that's dangerous or racist, or yes, there are sometimes issues, but a few years ago there was some movie here in India that caused a lot of people to rethink Australia as a destination, and I think there was some attack of some people at one stage who then went into, then it was made into a Bollywood movie, or it came up in a Bollywood movie, and so then a lot of people started to think that Australia was a racist place and had lots of problems. It's really not at all, and I'm not saying that because I have an Australian accent and an Australian passport, but when I go home, it's like, oh my gosh, there's nothing happening here. It's very quiet and very safe for women and for men, and
I'd second that. I mean, as I said, as a mother of a girl who I sent to that country, it's absolutely at peace, and it's important, and it's good you touch on, because at some point these forums, it just keeps coming up. I was with the Australian government when all that rap happened, and when people ask me, oh, aren't there going to be incidents? And I always say, go back and read about it. And I tell all of you to go back and read and actually go into that incident and see, was that really a student? that wasn't really a student. It wasn't a legitimate student. It wasn't somebody who was going to university. So go into the facts, and I think that's really important. This is, again, we're coming back to the whole biases in the morning, is when we don't have the facts. We're kind of hearing stuff. We're kind of seeing media and saying, yeah, it's an attack. But you go back to the incident and actually read it, you will know that it wasn't really a student and what really happened. Of course, it's been a long time since then. Thankfully, media has kind of realized, and we know that the campuses are safe. There's no shootings. There's no ragging. So there's, New Zealand, one of the most peaceful, countries. And in terms of the student support services, they're strictly around campus security and all of that. So, of course, both countries have a very strict gun law, which is very, very strict around their campuses, and they kind of implemented it. So I think those angles, we've come quite far from there. And to some extent, I think we're all grappling with what media loves as news. In the last week, we've just jumped every 2 days from one top news to the other, so some things are quickly forgotten. So thank you for that. We do have some time for question and answers, and I want to make sure we can kind of keep that interactive. We've not touched on any areas. Happy to take that around.
I have one doubt, especially to you, being the consultant. So government-funded public universities are there available in Australia. So how far Indian students will be there able to get admission to those universities? I came to know that there are 37 government-funded public universities.
Yeah, there are 43 universities. There is one government-funded, 2 international, 1 private. Indian students can apply to all of them. So they all accept international students.
Will they get any scholarships?
Scholarships, there are very attractive scholarships across the board, you can kind of get that a lot of information on the study in australia.gov.au. New Zealand's launched attractive scholarships this year for Indian students specifically. There's government scholarships across the board. Urge you to look at that. Australia has statewide scholarship, there's federal scholarships, and there is university scholarships. Now more than ever before. What's been happening now is more than ever before for particular areas of study. There's scholarships across the board. So they are very attractive scholarships. They could go, but they're all merit-based. They're not need-based scholarships. That's something you must understand. They could range from about $10,000 a year, which is as 25% of the fee, to about 100%. We know that a student last year from Delhi actually got a 100% scholarship at ANU. And I remember when they came for the interview. But it's across the board. I mean, you should talk to each one of them individually. But if you actually go to the study in australia.gov.au, which is the website for the Australian one, and the Education New Zealand website that has all the information on the scholarship. New Zealand definitely has a very formal, more broader system around scholarships, which they've launched, and very eagerly looking at high merit Indian students to support the talent, because effectively all these regions are growing, and they are in need for good talent to support the industries. So there's a good chance that if you've got an intelligent student of decent merit, they would have the opportunity of scholarship. So we can take that one-on-one. You can't. I think they're kind of, I don't know what's better, but, how do you define better in terms of that sense? But by and large, you kind of would peg that more broadly. Yeah. It's
So Immigration New Zealand wants 15,000 New Zealand dollars per year, which is around 7 lakh rupees per year for your living expenses.
Yeah.
So then you can compare that with whatever the given cost is for the US.
Exactly. So it again differs. This is what the government mandates. Living expense is quite a subjective thing. Whether you live on your own, you live in a shared accommodation, whether you live in university accommodation, all that stuff governs. So, but these are technically, we can definitely answer them one-on-one. Yeah.
What are the other bases for the scholarship? Is it only the merit on senior class, or is it something beyond that? Some profile or maybe something about...
Do you want to take that?
I'll do it for New Zealand, and then I'll pass it across the others. So it is primarily merit-based, and is primarily based on your 12th grade scores. We don't really take into account the 11th or the 10th. It's purely the 12th. If I had 2 students of very similar profile, very similar percentage, then at that stage I might take into account their extracurriculars. But if one is at 96 and the other is 92 or 80-something, then it's clear which one gets the scholarship. For post, yeah, again for post-graduation, we would be looking at their bachelor's scores.
What about standardized test scores?
We don't actually need standardized test scores. So, and people sometimes ask me if I have a really good IELTS score, do I get a scholarship? And my answer is no, you just need to speak English to a certain standard, but it doesn't get you extra marks.
What are the teaching scope over there for the school and university? If anybody wants to go for any teaching program in New Zealand, Australia.
I think, yeah, so that's more a professional service. That's not really that's more a migration-related question in terms of education and training as an industry is, of course, on the growth trajectory. But because we're particularly looking at students at a bachelor's and master's level, we kind of address that. But I guess more, if one wants to go there for a job, that really comes under the whole migration end of, skilled employability. You've been for a while. Yeah, thanks.
I have a couple of questions. I don't need the mic.
Sure.
The first question is not related to Bond or to your university. It's to do with Deakin University in Australia. I have an experience of a student who took admission in Deakin, misguided, or you could say she made a wrong choice. She applied for a master's in public relations and human resource, which sounded very good to the parent. She went there, but she, like many others who go to Australia and New Zealand particularly, parents would want to spend their money with one idea in mind, that they get a job and they settle down there and don't come. If I have to spend that money just to do a graduation, I may as well do it in India for pittance. So with that intention of not returning, she applied for a master's there. She got admission. However, in 2 or 3 months after getting the admission, she called back, and the parent called me, that she wanted to change her course in the same university. And so they inquired why. And she said that I found out that if I do my master's in public relations and human resource, there's very little chance of me getting a PR in Australia. If I want to get a PR, then I need to do either teaching, accounts, or nursing. Now you have to tell me whether this is true or not. Number one, she changed. She went to nursing. The end truth is, she's already got her PR. She went to teaching, sorry, and she's got her PR. She's a permanent resident now. However, the question I want to ask to the university official sitting here, because she changed her course in the same university, she lost the entire money she put down, and she had to pay again. She paid for the first 6 months, which was about $12,000 plus. And they said, if you want to change your course, you have to apply again, which wasn't fair, I thought. Is that the same with your university?
So I'm going to give you a very honest and a very frank answer. If you change your course and the subjects you have already studied cannot be credited against your new course, you will have to pay again. The reason for this is that you will have to do entirely new subjects. They can't be credited. Now, in terms of students choosing the right course, and in terms of students looking for study outcomes that will lead to migration, we as universities are not allowed to advise students on migration. There are strict government guidelines in place in both of our countries. That means you have to be a licensed immigration advisor to give any type of advice. So for me to tell a student, do this because you get migration, I could be fined a lot of money for that, maybe go to jail. That said, when I speak to students, they will usually tell me, some of them will come to me, and this is usually at postgrad rather than bachelor's level, and they'll sit down and go, ma'am, I'd like to do a master's at your university, and I want to settle there. And I'll say, well, yes, I have a lot of masters. What do you actually want to study, and what career outcomes do you want? Then I'll say, okay, what did you study previously? And we try to talk them through the options. And I believe this is what most of us would do in a marketing sense. So we can understand the student's background. We can understand what they want to study. We can recommend subjects to them. But it is not our decision what the student should choose. The student needs to do their own research. They need to understand what they want. I can't decide that every student that comes to my university wants to settle down there. Many do, and I would love it if they were to get their PR eventually, because that's great success stories for us as well. But all of the responsibility does not rest on the university. The student and their parents are taking a very serious decision. They are investing a lot of money, and I would expect them to put in their own time and effort. I will tell them something as a university. Another university will tell them something else. We will all present our own programs. In the end, they have to do the decision, and I think as counsellors, as representatives of other institutes here, you do need to encourage them that do not go blindly by what any institute tells you, and also do not go blindly by hearsay. So being in the market, sometimes people come up to me and they say, ma'am, I've heard this. And sometimes it is completely untrue things that have just become this sort of urban legend that gets passed on from person to person. So they do need to do their own research, they do need to fact check, and in the end they need to take responsibility for their own decisions.
Yeah, touched upon it. And effectively, if the student was interested in nursing, she shouldn't have been in PR, or if she was in PR, shouldn't have chosen. So migration should not be the outcome of studies, and this is about, as I said, getting up every morning and what do you want to do. And which is why we're talking about employability skills here, which each of these universities is working about. It's not about getting you a job in that region, which is why, again, using that to come to any part of the world. So we do have time for one last question, and we're going to, because we started 3 minutes late.
Actually, I'm from Nepal, and I have a couple of questions related to Australia and New Zealand, both because many of our students are interested a lot going to Australia and New Zealand apart from US. The first thing is, in our education system, you choose your kind of stream after grade 10. For example, you go to humanities or management or science after grade 10. And when the students are done, they're 12, and all of a sudden they find that they're not interested anymore in science, and they want to go to management and want to go to Australia or New Zealand. So I find that most of the time the students' visa has been rejected because they say that the subject they choose is not relevant to what they have done in their high school. So is it always that case? Because in US, I think it's not that way. And second thing I have is, like, we were talking about scholarships in Australia, and I think that is very good for our students, but is it region specific, or is it specific to, it's not specific, just the university provides this many scholarships? Does it provide this many for Chinese, Indians, Nepalese, or it's overall?
So I think the scholarships bit, you do have two categories. There is country-specific as well as broader scholarships. So if you are a certain nationality holder, you can kind of look under that, and there are broader undergraduate scholarships which are far more competitive. I'll let somebody take the visa bit. I know what the government stand would be, unless you want to talk on that, because I think that's a pretty much a visa regulation, but exactly.
I can answer it from a New Zealand point of view, and then I'll pass on to one of the Australian reps, because I don't actually know what their system is. New Zealand universities do not actually require any prerequisites in your 12th grade. We have recommended subjects which will make it easier for you to pursue your bachelor's, but you can come from arts and go into engineering, you can come from science and go into humanities. There's no restriction. On that point of view, it is our decision as universities who we accept, and a visa would not be denied on that basis. It could be denied on another basis for funds or something like that, but in terms of a New Zealand perspective, students can come from any background, go into any bachelor's, and they would not be denied a visa on that basis.
I can't speak on the university part, but I can speak on personal experience because something similar happened to me, but it was there's opportunities in Australia where you could do like a pre-university course. It might be a 6-month course at the university, like a startup school, where you can kind of do that to transition into university, where you get credit as well. So you're technically in school. But from as far as I know, again, not a visa expert or not giving any visa advice, I don't think that'll be the sole reason for someone to get rejected.
Exactly. They can't, I mean, they can talk about what gets you admitted into university, but visa is a complete student story. Everything needs to add up, and it's a discretion of a completely different department. With that, we end. I know the panelists are around here. If you have any one-on-one questions, we did have Kumkum is here in the room. We've got Anudnya in the room, counselors who were part of the Connect trip. So they've again had some great experiences around visiting Australia and the universities, and part of the many counselor trips that we've had. So do kind of, talk to them if you've got any insights you want. With a thanks once again to the panelists, a big round of cheer, and hope that's answered some questions about the region for you. Thank you. Thanks for being here.